Week 14 of the 2025 fantasy football season is right around the corner, and in today's video, we are going to be breaking down every single matchup from Thursday Night Football all the way up until Monday Night Football, and I'll be telling you guys whether I believe you should start or sit the running backs in all of your matchups, as well as where I believe these running backs will finish by the end of the week. Now, it's important to note that we have 4 teams on bye this week, the final bye weeks of the 2025 fantasy football season. We got the Patriots, the Giants, the 49ers, and the Carolina Panthers. So make sure you get the players on those teams out of your lineups. Before we do get on into things, though, I would like to ask that if you are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, that you please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. So without further ado, let's get into my week number 14 running back start or sit decisions for the 2025 fantasy football season. We begin with Thursday Night Football, the Dallas Cowboys at the Detroit Lions. Now, Javonte Williams has a rough matchup on paper this week, as the Lions defense is the second worst matchup for running backs on a per game basis. He is coming off of a solid game in a tougher matchup on Thanksgiving up against the Kansas City Chiefs, in which he had 17 carries for 59 yards with 3 receptions on 3 targets for 21 yards and a touchdown, which was his first touchdown since week number 8. For the first 8 weeks of the season, he was basically just a touchdown printing machine. We just saw the Lions defense get their clocks cleaned by Jordan Love and the Packers last week. So while I am definitely nervous going into the matchup, I still do believe that Javonte Williams is still a high-end running back number 2. Now, Malik Davis continues to look great on limited opportunities that he gets inside of this Cowboys offense. 3 rushes for 47 yards and a touchdown last week. The problem with Malik Davis is if I can't project him to get more than 4 touches, you aren't going to be able to start him in one of the worst matchups for RBs on a per-game basis, even though he does look incredible when he touches the ball. For the Detroit Lions, Jahmyr Gibbs, after scoring 55 PPR points up against the Giants in Week 12, followed that up with the RB26 performance up against the Packers, 20 carries for 68 yards with 3 receptions on 4 targets for 18 yards, a true letdown on Thanksgiving. This week, though, we can't let that down showing get us down and just start overthinking one of the best running backs in the National Football League. In the 15th best matchup for RBs on a per game basis, I expect Jahmyr Gibbs to bounce back as a top 3 running back. This is a matchup where I find it very difficult to paint a great picture like my name was Bob Ross for a great game for David Montgomery. Monty succeeds in games where the Lions are up a zillion and can feed Montgomery. This feels like a game that without Amon-Ra St. Brown, where the team may be trailing and Montgomery can't even muster up 10 plus touches. But, and there's a big but, shout out to Kim Kardashian, the matchup is good enough for Monty to break free and find the end zone. At this point in the season, he is a desperation start at best. Now we move to the 1 p.m. slated games on Sunday, the Seattle Seahawks at the Atlanta Falcons. Now, Kenneth Walker is as frustrating as it gets. We all know deep down that this guy has the upside to score 25 plus fantasy points in any given game. But the problem is the offense still inhibits him from being able to actually cook. They don't give him the 20 plus touches that he deserves weekly. Last week, he had 13 carries for 56 yards up against the Vikings with 3 receptions on 4 targets for 18 yards. He has been reliable over the last 3 weeks, so he will clearly be a start here in the 10th best matchup for running backs. Are you ever going to actually feel great about him? Fuck no, baby. But this feels like the kind of game where they should be running the rock a ton, and Walker could find the end zone. He is a mid-range RB2 for me. Zach Charbonnet weekly has upside due to the fact that the team loves to cuck Kenneth Walker and give Charbonnet chances to find the end zone. He has scored in 3 of the last 4 games. Now, the touchdowns don't always equal a good enough fantasy day for him, but with 4 teams on bye in a good matchup, you can start Charbonnet as a YOLO break glass in case of emergency running back number 3. Then we got the Falcons. Now, Bijan Robinson is a must-start running back every single week. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Last week, he had the Jets defense bending over backwards in MetLife, 23 carries for 142 yards and a touchdown with 5 receptions on 7 targets for 51 yards as the RB1. This week, he has a brutal matchup against the Seahawks, who allow the 5th worst amount of points to running backs on a per-game basis. And the game script here will likely not allow the Falcons to run the ball a ton. Regardless, though, Bijan Robinson is Bijan Robinson. You are going to start him regardless of the matchup. I got him as a mid-range RB1 this week. Tyler Algier is a pest to Bijan Robinson owners. This motherfucker will vulture a touchdown that, you know, you think maybe it's Bijan time. Nope, Tyler Algier comes on in there and scores a touchdown. It honestly feels like it just happens every single week, and it is beyond frustrating. 8 rushes for 20 yards last week with a touchdown, as well as 2 receptions on 2 targets for 35 yards as the RB20. Algier's touches bounce all over the place on a weekly basis, and it is very much impossible to actually pinpoint the amount of touches he will get any given game. He could just as easily get 15 touches this week as he could get 3. So for me, in a bad matchup, I have no interest in playing him. Now we move to the Cincinnati Bengals at the Buffalo Bills. Now Chase Brown is on fire like he was in Dante's Inferno. 5 straight games with 15 or more PPR points with Joe Burrow back. He was a low-end running back 1 last week in Baltimore in a dominating performance by the Bengals offense. He had 15 carries for 78 yards and 7 receptions on 7 targets for 35 yards with Joe Burrow looking at tip-top shape, and with Chase Brown playing so well in the 4th best matchup for RBs on a per-game basis, I expect Chase Brown to stay in the flame, and I got him as a must-start top 6 back this week. Samaje Perine saw 14 carries for 39 yards last week with 2 receptions on 2 targets for 15 yards. I definitely do not expect 16 touches to be the usual for him with Chase Brown healthy, especially since he was very inefficient with his carries. I expect him to go back to a questionable amount of touches, which would make him a clear sit. America runs on Duncan, and the Buffalo Bills run on James Cook. James Cook is the skeleton key to the success of the offense, and the offense has great success when James Cook is playing well. 3 straight 18-plus point showings in PPR as a top 10 running back. Last week, the guy had 32 carries in Pittsburgh for 144 yards with 3 receptions on 3 targets for 33 yards up against a Bengals defense that did look far better than anyone has expected up against the Ravens last week. They still did allow Henry to have a top 12 finish, and they allow the most points to running backs on a per game basis. So while they may have struck a pot of gold last week and got incredibly lucky, I don't expect the defense to strike gold here. James Cook is a must-start top 5 running back for me on the week. Now, every once in a blue moon, Ty Johnson will house a check down and have a solid showing. So while this may be the matchup on paper where you can paint that picture Picasso style, I just can't do it because, you know, Ray Davis also appeared more last week. I would prefer to just stay away from any running back not named James Cook in Buffalo. Next up, we got the Tennessee Titans at the Cleveland Browns. Now, despite the Browns getting a train ran on them by the 49ers, Quinshawn Judkins got fed. 23 carries for 91 yards and 3 receptions on 3 targets for 18 yards as a high-end running back, too. Back-to-back starts with Shedeur Sanders with 15-plus PPR points. The team clearly wants to limit the passing output of Sanders, thus giving Judkins a big load. Pause. In the 9th best matchup for running backs on a per-game basis, I got QJ as a locked and loaded high-end running back number 2. Dylan Sampson is listed as day-to-day with a calf injury. If he ends up missing this week, that would mean Jerome Ford F-150 will operate as the running back 2. In that case, he would also be a sit if Sampson is able to play. Through the injury, he would also be a sit as the RB2 role in Cleveland is very, very shaky in terms of touches on a weekly basis. Then for the Tennessee Titans, Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears are obvious sits this week. Not only are they in a pretty even snap split, they're in an offense that reeks to high heaven. Just when you think maybe Cam Ward has figured things out up against Seattle in week number 12, he follows that up by turning into Matt Murdock against the Jaguars last week. You match that with the fact that the Browns are the 8th worst matchup for running backs. I wouldn't touch either of these guys with a 10-foot pole. Now we got the left hands up. Who are we? The Commanders at the cold like Minnesota Vikings. Now, Aaron Jones exited last week with a shoulder injury up against the Seahawks and is currently listed as day-to-day, which does point me in the direction of believing he will play. Now, I'm as much of a doctor as Johnny Sins, so take that with a grain of salt, but typically day-to-day means the guy has a good chance to suit up, especially if the game is not on Thursday and it's on Sunday. If he was to miss, then Jordan, the numbers, Mason, what do they mean? Would be the RB1. Mason had 6 carries for 3 yards with 4 receptions on 4 targets for 22 yards before the injury. This week, in the 3rd best matchup for RBs on a per-game basis, if he suits up, he's a low-end RB2. If he is out and Mason is in, Mason would be in the exact same spot. I understand Nick, JJ McCarthy sucks. He does, but at least the offense should look better than they looked last week, because oh my, Miss American Pie, something stunk in Seattle, and it was the Minnesota Vikings quarterback, Jordan Mason. If Aaron Jones is in, you just cannot play him because Aaron Jones will have the reins of the backfield. Chris Rodriguez for the Commanders is fine to play if you're down bad, but ultimately the upside to me just feels far too limited for me to actually start him. While he is the lead back in the Commanders backfield, this is still very much a split between Jeremy McNichols, him, and Bill Nye, the science guy, JCM. Last week, we saw Chris Rodriguez be the RB31 with 41% of the snaps up against the Broncos, with 11 carries for 41 yards and a touchdown with 1 target. The Vikings are the 19th best matchup for RBs on a per-game basis. He has scored a touchdown in 4 of the last 6 games. The problem, again, though, is the upside to me really feels like 14 fantasy points. It doesn't seem like even if he was to go ballistic, he's dropping his nuts and scoring 25 plus fantasy points. So if you have to play him, go right ahead. I get there's a bunch of teams on bye, but for me, I would prefer to leave him on my bench. McNichols should see a decent amount of snaps and looks good, but ultimately with C-Rod being the guy that can score, you're not going to be playing Jeremy McNichols. Now we got the Miami Dolphins at the New York Jumbo Jets, but before we break down this game in depth at the running back position, as well as the rest of the games on the Week 14 slate, I would like to give you guys a quick word for our friends, our partner over at Underdog. If you're brand new to Underdog and sign up using promo code Notorious, or by clicking on the link in the video description, you'll get a free pick plus a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus funds, as well as if you play $5 in the pick'em, you receive an additional $100 in bonus funds or in bonus entries. How does the pick'em work? It's incredibly simple. You make at least 2 picks on the players higher or lower. If those picks hit, you get paid. If you do multiple other picks, then the payout will be higher, but obviously all the picks need to hit, so make sure you guys do check that out. Promo code Notorious, or by clicking on the link in the video description. Back on into things here with the Miami Dolphins at the New York Jumbo Jets. Now, Devon Achane is the Dolphins offense. When Achane is on fire, the Dolphins are unstoppable. 3 straight top 8 showings for Achane, and there are no signs of the Achane train slowing down. He has been a top 18 running back every single week this season, and a top 12 running back in 5 straight games. Last week up against the Saints, he had 22 carries for 134 yards and a tug, with 1 target up against a Jets defense. Allows the 5th most points to RBs on a per game basis that just got absolutely face fucked by Bijan Robinson last week. I expect Devon Achane to raw dog them as a must start top 3 RB, with the Dolphins utilizing both Ollie Gordon and Jalen Wright behind Achane. There's no way you can trust either guy enough to start them. If for some reason you had to start one of them, your RBs are down bad, I would go with Ollie Gordon because he is the more likely of the pair of him and Jalen Wright to score. But at the end of the day, with 5 touches not even being a lock for the guy, you're not going to start either him or Jalen Wright. For the Jets, with Breece Hall now having Tyrod Taylor under center, things have gotten far better for Breece. Back-to-back games with over 13 PPR points, and the offense actually looks like a real NFL offense. With Justin Fields not able to handicap the team last week against the Falcons in a winning effort, Breece was a mid-range RB2 with 19 carries for 68 yards and a touchdown, as well as 2 receptions on 2 targets for 8 yards. The Dolphins defense are the 14th best matchup for RBs, and they have locked up some excellent running backs recently, like James Cook and Bijan Robinson, but they have also allowed some lesser running backs to look very, very good, but they're still is going to be times here, even with the Dolphins defense looking a lot better as of recently, where Breece can exploit our defense. So to me, he is a high-end RB2 for me on the week. Isaiah Davis saw just 12% of the snaps last week compared to Breece's 88%, and he didn't even get a single touch. I would expect him to see more work this week, but nothing worthy of being started. Now we move to the New Orleans Saints at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, going into last week, I was nervous about Bucky Irving. All of the reports indicated that the team was going to use the just the tip approach and ease Bucky back into things. Instead, the team elects to go balls deep, and Bucky Irving looks better than Aunt May in Tom Holland's new Spider-Man movies. And this is very high praise, as Marissa Tomei looks very nice, I like, in those movies. 17 carries for 61 yards and a touchdown, as well as 2 receptions on 2 targets for 20 yards up against the Arizona Cardinals, playing 52% of the snaps, compared to Rashad White's 38% and Sean Tucker's 15%. I do expect him to get ramped up closer to the 70% mark soon, facing a Saints defense that allows the 16th most points to RBs on a per-game basis. We just saw Achane run all over them. I expect Bucky to finish as a mid-range running back one this week at minimum. For Rashad White, we saw more snaps and touches go his way than Sean Tucker, just 5 touches total though, with my expectation being that we see more touches go the way of Bucky. No need to start Rashad with 2 A's White. Now, Devin Neal is in the driver's seat without Alvin Kamara and saw a hefty workload up against the Dolphins. 82% of the snaps for Devin Neal to have Evan Hull have just 18% of the snaps. He had 14 carries for 47 yards and 3 receptions on 3 targets for 22 yards, scoring 9.9 PPR points, failing to crack the top 30 at the running back position. He has a better matchup this week as the Buccaneers allow the 9th most points to RBs on a per-game basis. So while I do think Devin Neal is a sit, assuming that Kamara misses again with the MCL sprain, if you are in a pickle and you have to start someone, I'm not going to sit here and act like Devin Neal is like this clear must sit, right? If you flip one of the guys that we talked about earlier that are like fringe RB3 starts and you wanted to play Devin Neal instead, I'm not going to judge you. It's just, to me, hard to see some huge upside since I just don't think the Saints offense really is all that good. And if I don't feel confident enough to rank Devin Neal as a start, I'm obviously not going to be playing Evan Hull. Now we move to the Indianapolis Colts at the Jacksonville Jaguars in Duval. A very, very, very interesting game for the standings in the AFC. Jonathan Taylor owners have been down bad since the bye week. RB28 coming out the bye up against the Chiefs in Arrowhead, and as a mid-range RB2 last week up against the Texans. Now, obviously, him scoring 15.1 PPR points last week actually isn't bad, but considering how the guy was just scoring 25-plus points per game, basically every single game earlier on in the season, it definitely sucks when he only gets 15 points, right? Last week, he had 21 carries for 85 yards with 3 receptions on 5 targets for 36 yards. The Jaguars are the 4th worst matchup for RBs on a per-game basis, but like I said about Bijan Robinson, Jonathan Taylor is Jonathan Taylor, right? You're starting him whether he's going up against the school of blind and deaf or if he's going up against the 2000 Baltimore Ravens. I got him as a must-start top 6 running back this week. JT played 98% of the snaps last week and over 90% of the snaps in 3 straight games. He is one of the true workhorse running backs in the NFL, making his backup, cough, cough, Amir Abdullah, unstartable. Now, Travis Etienne's heater came to an end last week after 4 straight 15-plus PPR point showings coming out the bye. He finished outside the top 50 at the running back position up against the Tennessee Titans in Tennessee. 12 carries for 28 yards with 1 reception on 1 target for 13 yards. Tootin was the back who ended up scoring last week. He found the end zone. Sadly, Etienne did not. I won't let one game down, though, for him sway me. Right? You shouldn't. It's the 21st best matchup for RBs. I get this isn't a wet dream spot, but Etienne has been very reliable, so he's a mid-range RB2. Bishal Tootin has now scored in 3 of his last 5 games. The problem is, in the games in which he actually found the end zone, he has eclipsed over 10 PPR points just once. So with Etienne healthy and with Tootin's touches bouncing all over the place on a weekly basis, he cannot be trusted enough to actually start him. Now we got the final game on the 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time slate. The Pittsburgh Steelers at the Baltimore Ravens. Another very, very, very interesting matchup for the AFC playoff picture. Jaylen Warren is still the lead back on this team, but at this point, the split is feeling dangerous like Baker in Cleveland. Jaylen Warren played 56% of the snaps last week up against the Bills compared to 42% for Kenneth Gainwell. The week before, it was virtually 50-50 with Warren getting 50% and Gainwell getting 51%. Warren had 10 carries for 35 yards up against the Bills with a touchdown and 2 receptions on 4 targets for 9 yards as the RB23, marking back-to-back weeks with the touchdown for Mr. Warren. Gainwell, on the other hand, had 5 carries for 20 yards and 2 receptions on 3 targets for 25 yards. Warren is still clearly the back to have out of the two and is in the 13th best matchup for RBs on a per game basis this week. So while things are definitely a lot more dicey, While there are more question marks now than ever, I still got Jaylen Warren as a high-end RB2. Assuming this game is more competitive than last week where the Bills put the Pittsburgh Steelers in a body bag, we could see a bigger showing out of Gainwell here, who was a top 9 running back in weeks 11 and weeks 12. I know week 11, Warren gets hurt, but Warren was healthy in week 12 and he was still a top 9 back. I wouldn't expect much, as again, Warren should still get more touches, but in this matchup, I can definitely see Gainwell being at least fine, so I got him as a fringe start RB3. Again, if you wanted to play Devin Neal over Kenneth Gainwell, I'm not going to argue with you about that. For the Ravens, they're just slipping like they stepped on a fucking banana peel. Lamar Jackson is playing like Surreal Gone. I poked both of his eyes before each game like he did to Tom Aspinall, and yet Derrick Henry has been playing phenomenally over the last 3 games. He is on a heater. All 3 of those games with 17 plus PPR points as a top 12 back. 10 carries for 60 yards last week up against the Bengals with a touchdown as well as 1 reception on 1 target for 44 yards. In the 23rd best matchup for RBs, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I will be firing him up as a low-end running back 1. Keaton Mitchell continues to look great with the ball in his hands, finding the end zone last week. The problem is that touches are nowhere close to where you can even speculatively start him. Just 5 touches last week on 48% of the snaps. You cannot start him. Now we move to the 4 p.m. slated games with the Denver Broncos at the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, for the Raiders, I just cannot wait until Ashton Genty has a real quarterback on the team. Geno Smith just nosedives this offense on a weekly basis. He just dives like he's in an Olympic-sized swimming pool straight into the fucking kiddie part of the pool where it's like 3 feet tall or 2 feet tall with the water. Last week up against the Chargers, 15 carries for 31 yards with 6 receptions on 8 targets for 30 yards, scoring 12.1 PPR points. He has now, though, had 8 targets in 3 straight games. So while Geno Smith is straight up buns, Genty can survive in your lineup due to all of these dump-offs. Last time these 2 teams played was back in week 10 in Denver. In that game, Genty had 19 carries for 60 yards and a touchdown with 3 receptions on 5 targets for 3 yards. In the 6th worst matchup for RBs, I got him as a mid-range RB2. This isn't 2023, so you aren't going to be starting Raheem Mostert. For the Denver Broncos, RJ Harvey had his way with the Commanders' defense on Sunday Night Football. Technically, he didn't have an efficient running day, right? He wasn't super efficient, but he found the end zone twice on 13 carries for 35 yards, as well as 3 receptions on 4 targets for 27 yards as the RB2, with his second best showing of the season. Without J.K. Dobbins, the wheels are up for RJ Harvey to blast off like his name was Jimmy Neutron. In the 12th best matchup for RBs on a per-game basis up against the Raiders, I got him as a low-end RB2. Now, Jaleel McLaughlin could definitely vulture Harvey this week like he did back in week 11, but he did have just 7 touches in both games, and with Harvey clearly in the driver's seat, no need to play the guessing game here. I would just leave him on the bench, especially since Tyler Bidet will probably outsnap him again. Now we got the Chicago Bears at the Green Bay Packers in Lambeau. Now, Ben Johnson has created his new version of Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery in Chicago with DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monungai. Last week, the duo hit the Eagles in the city of brotherly love with an Eiffel Tower. 18 carries for 125 yards and a touchdown for Swift as a top five running back with 1 reception on 2 targets for 13 yards. Is a nice cherry on top. Monungai had 22 carries for 130 yards and a touchdown, marking 4 straight games with a touchdown for Kyle. The Packers are the 9th worst matchup for RB, so regression certainly can occur here. But based on how strong the Bears offense has looked running the football, Swift and Monungai are both low-end RB2s. Now, by preference, if I had both, would lean with Swift because I just feel like Swift has more upside, but Monungai does appear to be the safer of the 2 backs. Now, for the first time in forever, shout out to Anna and Elsa. Josh Jacobs didn't score a touchdown last week in Detroit. 17 carries for 83 yards and 1 reception on 1 target for 8 yards in a Turkey Day W up against the Lions. Now, he didn't score the game prior up against the Giants, but he did get hurt earlier on in that game, so I don't even really count that. Before that, a touchdown or more in 6 straight games. So while he disappointed us big time in Detroit, I expect him to get back on the saddle John Wayne style in the 17th best matchup for RBs on a per game basis. I got Jacobs as a low-end RB1. Emmanuel Wilson is a great handcuff. As we have seen without Jacobs, he plays very well. But with Jacobs in the fold, there isn't even a guarantee for the guy to get 5 touches. Last week, just 4 carries for 14 yards. I would leave him on your bench. Now we got the LA Rams at the Arizona Cardinals. Now, Kyren Williams got banged up last week with the ankle up against the Panthers in Carolina, but was able to return, so the safe assumption is that he will be in the lineup on Sunday. In that game, he had 13 carries for 72 yards and a touchdown, as well as 1 target as the RB21. The Cardinals are the 8th best matchup for running backs on a per-game basis. Kyren has been pretty reliable as of recently, so in a game where I expect the Rams to take their anger out from that L that they took up against the Carolina Panthers, I got Kyren as a low-end RB1. Now, Blake Corum did find the end zone last week, but with just 2 touchdowns on the season, it is very hard for you to, argue that that's going to happen again. He should get around 10 touches, but as I say every week, he hasn't really done much with all the touches this season, and he's more just frustrating if you have Kyren Williams, so I would stay away from Blake Corum. For the Arizona Cardinals, last week, it really seemed like Trey Benson was going to return, and that he was going to be back in the lineup. We haven't seen him for a while, but then he had back-to-back DNPs, did not participate in practice to end the week, and ultimately missed the game. To me, that sounds like the alarm should be sounding that maybe he's going to miss again, especially since the team has until next Wednesday to activate Trey Benson, so they don't have to force him back in this week. With Benson, Bam is the guy that would be very scary to play, because I think Benson will be the guy. But without Benson, Bam is the guy you want in Arizona. Running back 14 last week in Tampa with 11 carries for 62 yards and 3 receptions on 3 targets for 36 yards and a touchdown. The Rams matchup is brutal. It's the 3rd worst matchup for RBs on a per-game basis. But then again, we did just see Chuba Hubbard produce against them, so Bam would be a low-end RB2 due to the amount of touches that he gets. Now, Carter should see a healthy amount of dump-offs to potentially have a decent game, but with the touchdowns going to be going the way of Zonovan Knight, there's just not a lot of upside, so I'd prefer to sit Michael Carter. Now we move to, cause you waited all day for Sunday night, the Houston Texans at the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, Woody Marks has not had a friend in me as of recently. He has stunk it up over the last 3 weeks, 3 straight games without scoring over 8 PPR points. Last week against the Colts, he had 19 carries for 64 yards and 1 reception on 1 target for 3 yards. He got vultured by 9-inch Nicholas Chubb in that game, but there is still very much going to be touches for Woody Marks, right? This is very much his backfield. Now, this matchup is also bad, right? It's the 7th worst matchup for RBs on a per-game basis. But the thing is, I really feel like the guys do. You don't just get that many touches weekly and not magically, miraculously fall into the end zone, right? We've seen the upside this season. So while I'm definitely way more nervous than I would have been just even going into last week, up against the Colts, I got him as a low-end RB2. Now, Nick Chubb did score last week, but his role in the offense is sleeping with the fishes. He hasn't scored over 10 points since week 5. You're not going to be playing him. For the Chiefs, Kareem Hunt let us down last week. It was a Thanksgiving tragedy as he could not find the end zone. 14 carries for 58 yards in Jerry's world with 1 reception on 2 targets for 22 yards. Prior to last week, he scored at least 1 touchdown in 4 straight games. This week, he has the 22nd best matchup for RBs on a per-game basis. Kareem is largely a touchdown-dependent or bust type of guy, but in a must-win game for the Chiefs, I expect the offense to be percolating here and Kareem to potentially score, so I got him as a low-end RB2. Again, a lot of these guys that are low-end RB2s are definitely getting boosted up by the fact that there are 4 teams on bye. In Pacheco's return, he had just 5 touches last week. I would definitely expect him to get ramped up further, so I wouldn't expect him to just be like a 5-touch guy going forward. But based on the production we have seen all season out of the fucking guy, there is zero need to start him. He has virtually 0 touchdown upside. Final game here, Monday Night Football, the Philadelphia Eagles at the LA Superchargers. Saquon Barkley has been straight up ass. Shout out to Lena Paul. Since the team has come out the bye week, 4 straight games with less than 14 PPR points and not a single top 12 showing since week number 8, and just 3 top 12 games on the season. A far cry from what we saw out of Saquon last season. Last week up against the Bears, it's a great matchup. 13 carries for 56 yards and 2 targets. I do think he gets back to being fine like he was in weeks 10 through 12. But with how bad the offense has looked, it's hard to imagine that Saquon goes ballistic here in the 20th best matchup for RBs on a per game basis. So he's just like a mid-range RB2. For Saquon's backup, Will Shipley, even with Barkley on the struggle bus, Will Shipley may not even see 10% of the snaps. So I would just leave him on my bench. Now, for the Chargers, according to Jim Harbaugh regarding O'Brien Hampton, we opened his window, and we certainly wouldn't have done that 21-day window if he wasn't close. I feel like he's on track, and we'll let the week play out again. I would assume that he is back this week, but again, we will have to see, right? To me, based on how Vidal has played, I would project them to ease Hampton in, right? I don't think we'll see Hampton's first game back, and them just, throw him out there to the Wolves with 70+% of the snaps. Now, I could obviously be wrong, like I was on Bucky last week, but Vidal's been playing so well, so why would they feed him instantly, right? I still would prefer Hampton over Vidal, and I still think you will see more touches, but he would just be a high-end RB3 for me if he does play, because again, I think there are touch concerns. It is the 7th best matchup for RBs, though. Now, if Hampton is out again, I would be banging the drum for Vidal as a low-end RB2 because he's going to see the lion's share of the touches. And he's coming off a game with 126 yards and a touchdown against the Raiders as the RB4. So while I won't bang the drum for Hampton, I would feel much better about Vidal if Hampton was out. So thank you guys all so much for watching. If you didn't enjoy today's video, make sure you do hit that subscribe button down below like it owes you some money. Leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. I love you guys all so much. Hope you guys do have a great rest of your guys' day. Check out one of the videos on your screen if you haven't seen them already. Love you long time. As always, good boy.